Good afternoon. It's lovely to be back at Calvary, Memphis, with all of you. Thank you very much, Catherine, and everyone for the opportunity to be here. I know I have a quiet voice. Can you hear me? Has the volume gone up enough now? Yeah. So we're going to talk about the devil now, just to let you know. You can leave if you want. And then I'll just say, "Get behind me, Satan," as you go. When I was a small boy, I asked my parents if I could get a Bible, a children's Bible, and the first thing I did when I got it, because it had pictures, was to look through to see if there was a picture of the devil. And I am here to tell you that there was, and the devil is sky blue with red eyes and a convenient tail for distinguishing him, and he has the feet of a goat. And then when I was born in 1975, so in my kind of years of puberty, when it was clear to me that I was gay, I heard a lot about the devil as well, because that was the time when HIV was being spoken about an enormous amount in awkward ads on the television that you were supposed to be frightened of but not meant to ask your parents about, because that would involve actually discussing sex. And then the way, the kind of dehumanizing way within which gay men in particular at that stage, but in a broader context, other people, LGBTQ people were being discussed, was making devils out of us. And when I was 18, I got put through 3 exorcisms by a strange American. Oh my. And so my life really has been consumed with a lot of thought about the devil. And I would have been very happy to not have had such a life. That would have been a much better employment of my theological imagination. But I needed to turn to the Bible to figure out, what does it say? I have great respect for people who found it in themselves to walk away from religion. I was too frightened to do that, actually, because the terrible thing is that I believed in the devil, and I believed that the devil would get me if I did walk away. And so in a certain sense, I stayed in order to fight. And I don't regret that, although I also do. It had a certain level of fear and cowardice in it. And I applaud those people who had it within them to just go, no, hell no, I'm out of here. Joseph Campbell, the great anthropologist, said, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." So I turn to the text. Here's a sonnet called Wild. It's written to Jesus. Because you too struggled, you went into the wild with nothing to shield you from the light. You learned to shade your eyes from the sun. You sweated in your sleep in the heat of the day. You made up stories to waste time and to keep the fear away. It didn't work. You wrestled with a devil more subtle than the one you'd read about. He didn't lurk in the corner of your cave or scream at you with a night blue mouth. He didn't roast you or launch himself out at you all bat wings and hooves. He was always with you, but you didn't see that till the end. You'd been worrying about food and flight and fancy and how to be who you were. You've been worrying about prayer and the way a man should care for his country when his country's a plaything for a despot. You'd been worrying about thirst and endings. You feared death, not fear, but both made you feel like a failure. One brutal, final, the other goes on forever. Just like you and the devil I see through you. To take Jesus of Nazareth seriously, and this text that we heard from Luke's Gospel, is to take reading seriously. And I read the stories of the life of Jesus of Nazareth not as a follower, but as someone, because of culture and empire and devotion and desire and rebellion and curiosity and art in me, I'm someone who's had to reckon with Jesus of Nazareth and his language and what apparently he's supposed to have said for many years. Those things may or may not be true, but it kind of doesn't matter. They've become true because of the way our cultures and our politics and our lives and our laws have been informed by the best and the worst of the representation of whoever this strange character was who was put to death by Empire himself. And I know I'm not alone in that. So many of us are part of that. My apologies for the noise. What we see here in the text from the 4th chapter of the Gospel of Luke is Jesus of Nazareth going into the wilderness, the desert, an abandoned place. And he meets a tempter there. And it's too easy to think of the tempter in this context looking a little bit like the sky blue fella with the flaming red eyes. Really what he met was a version of himself, and a question as to who is it that I'm supposed to be and how is it that I'm supposed to be. There's 3 temptations. Mark records that Jesus went into the desert to be tempted. That's it. Matthew and Luke have the temptations, the same temptations, but in a different order, which really displays the literary project of Matthew and Luke. And what are the temptations? The order of them in Luke is, turn stones to bread, bow and receive more power than you could imagine, and throw yourself from the temple. In other words, we must recognize that perhaps this Jesus of Nazareth character in wilderness, at the edge of himself, wondering about how to be who he was hungry, had ambition, and sometimes walked the delicate edge of himself. Just like you, just like me. Have hunger, ambition, and you're sometimes at the edge of yourself. Maybe often, like me. And these things must have been actual temptations, ambition, the edge of himself. Because, like, if one of you good people in Calvary, Memphis, comes up to me afterwards and says to me, do you want to do some heroin? I'll say no thanks. I'd be surprised that you're here, and that you're being so polite in your Memphis way of offering it for me. But it's not a temptation for me. Temptation's only temptation if it's a temptation. If you're like, well, that's very strange, no thanks, it's not a temptation. So there's a vulnerability somehow in the record we have that these things were a temptation to Jesus of Nazareth. The magic of it all, the pizzazz of it all, the power of it all, the ambition of it all, the reputation of it all, and the possibility of destruction of it all. That these were chaoses that this character held within himself, just like me, just like you. These edges we bring ourselves to. These deeper desires for satisfaction and for reputation, for fulfillment of giftedness, and a desire to belong to someone or something or somewhere. The voice of the tempter promised very quick solutions. Fast, 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 go. You see that today too. If you want to get more handsome, more pretty, if you want to be better at sex, if you want to be more wealthy, if you want to be whatever, there's all kinds of promises that are sold to you. It's all about money, of course. It's all about money here too. Not in terms of the exchange of cash, but in terms of an economy that's occurring. Give your entire economy, a word from Greek meaning household, give all of that over to this temptation, and suddenly you're in the household of something that's impoverished in its imagination. I get it, I totally do. I understand the desire for quick solutions in a world where time sometimes can be cruel. But the invitation of this text is to find a way to be alone in a wilderness. What's so interesting is that Jesus is alone and not alone. And I'm not going to say God's with him, because he really was alone. What he was present with, though, is literature. Because he turned to literature that he had embodied in himself in each of the responses. What was his favorite literature? I don't know. But certainly he'd internalized something that he turned to. A text, some kind of container to hold him steady. And what is the literature of your life? And there isn't the right answer to this. It doesn't have to be the Gospels. The question for me is, what is good enough that in a time of absolute temptation toward the betrayal of your own deepest integrity, in a time when your desire for a speedy solution is understandable but flimsy, what text can you turn to that might hold you steady? One does not live by bread alone, Jesus of Nazareth says to himself, and also worship the Lord your God and serve only him. He's got some kind of talisman, some kind of pillar to which he's holding himself, some recognition that language itself has integrity, even if his own integrity feels like it's on shifting sands. And then also he'll command his angels concerning you to protect you, and on their hands they'll bear you up. He knows these texts, and he's also wrestling with, how do I interpret them? What do they mean? Jesus is a rabbinical school within himself, certainly in Matthew's Gospel, less so in Luke's Gospel, but definitely he is some kind of rabbinical school. Who am I to be, is the question he's asking himself. There's a linguistic argument you can make that the way that the tempter says, if you are the Son of God, can be interpreted very accurately, less about if you are or not, but more since you are. And as a result of that, to take that interpretation, it isn't am I or am I not, because that's just a binary question, that's easy. But it's the question, the awful question about the future. Given that I believe this about myself, given that I have some kind of capacity, how should I hold it? That's a terrible crisis. Ignatius of Loyola says, no good decision is made between choosing between a good one and a bad one. Choose the good one, for God's sake. That's not difficult, This is saying, how do I discern? How do I make a decision about how to be? And that is a crisis. You know it. Of course you do. To be alive is to know this, to connect with it in some kind of a way. And Jesus seems to be searching for language that's good enough to hold himself to a judgment. And it's a struggle. And the function of the tempter, and the tempter does have that, the function of the tempter is part of the discernment. The devil isn't real, but we make the devil real. And the question is will you listen? And what will you listen to? And that is one of the functions of the devil when it comes to our world. It's far too easy to believe in the devil and therefore to dehumanize people and to say, well, they're just evil, let me write them off entirely. We see what that's doing every day in your own neighborhood, in your parish, although I'm sure this is a perfect parish. You see it in your society, you see it in my society, you see it in global politics. It's far too easy. Lucille Clifton is an extraordinary American poet. She died about 13 or 14 years ago, and she has an 8-part poem called Brothers, and she introduces it almost like it's a piece of drama. And the introduction says, being in conversation in 8 poems between an aged Lucifer and God, though only Lucifer is heard. The time is long after. That's the introduction to this poem, Brothers. You'll find it completely free on the Poetry Foundation website if you want to read the 8 parts. They're shortish, I'm going to read 2 of them for you now. It's a shortish poem. Lucille Clifton, Brothers, is the poem. So this is the second part, and it's called How Great Thou Art. And this is the voice of Lucifer speaking, because the voice of God at no point responds to anything in this 8-part poem. So here's Lucifer. Listen, you are beyond even your own understanding. That rib and rain and clay and all its pride, its unsteady dominion is not what you believed you were. But it is what you are. In your own image, as some lexicographer supposed, the face, both he and she, the odd ambition, the desire to reach beyond the stars is you, the loneliness, the perfect imperfection. What? It's a crisis that she's talking about. The crisis of being in this brilliant dramatic poem. This, Emily Dickinson calls it, speaking about ourselves, the finite infinitude. That we have the imagination of timelessness in us in a body that is absolutely bound by time. The desire to reach beyond the stars, the loneliness and the perfect imperfection. This is what these characters of God and the devil present to us. The crisis of being alive, that we're motivated by powers that are complicated and impenetrable to us. So no wonder we need a devil. It makes it far much easier. The 6th section of Lucille Clifton's brilliant poem opens with an epigraph from Caroline Forche. The epigraph is, "The silence of God is God." And the words in this 6th section are like a prayer or an accusation or a demand, and it could be the voice of someone in Gaza mourning their child, or someone in Ukraine mourning their town, or in Russia lamenting the execution of someone in whom they place their hope, or someone in Israel wondering if their kidnapped loved one is alive or dead and will get back to mark the anniversary of somebody who has been murdered brutally. Here's the 6th part. Tell us why, in the confusion of a mountain of babies stacked like cordwood, of limbs walking away from each other, of tongues bitten through by the language of assault, tell us why you neither raised your hand nor turned away. Tell us why you watched the excommunication of that world and you said nothing. Lucille Clifton is placing words in the mouth of Lucifer that brings us into a dramatic dialogue that enlivens the question of being alive. Lucifer, angel of light. Lucille, person of light. She's connecting light and light, dark and dark. How is it that we pay attention to the necessary function of accusation, of accusation, of lament, of rage, of impenetrability, and of a sense of fear and powerlessness that we have? This is part of the function of the devil, not to believe in the devil, but to allow the literary function of the devil to bring us to a better intelligence, how we live and how we wrestle. And Jesus seems to have been a social man. He's remembered for his friendships and his followers, his capacity to deal well with interruption most of the time, his capacity to try to live according to his deepest integrity, even when he is being wrecked by the assault of empire. And he praised people who were used to scorn. You might say that he was a people person, perhaps. Certainly he needed time alone, but he did like people, it seems. And so if something happened to him in the wilderness, and he was alone, so how do we have some kind of record of this? Hyperbolized into the appearance of a fiery-eyed devil. He told people to say, I went somewhere alone and I faced a part of myself. And they maybe dressed it up to say, no, you're pretty perfect. Let's turn it into a fantastical encounter. But he would have told them, I think, about the edge of himself. He would have faced the devil in himself. And that, I think, is one of the messages of this, is not to dress it up in a fantastical account, but to face the intelligence of the devil in yourself and to be part of that conversation, like Lucille Clifton does, to bring us into the accusation and the silence, and to find yourself somewhere there, echoed in both. What else helped? I'll finish with this. Mark's Gospel, as I mentioned, also makes a reference to Jesus going into the desert. And it's very short. And the Spirit immediately drove him, Jesus, out into the wilderness. He was in the wilderness 40 days, tempted by Satan, and he was with the wild beasts, and the angels waited on him. Mark's Gospel might have been written around the year AD 65. Years ago I heard it speculated by a theologian, I think very accurately and possibly correctly, that the wild animals mentioned here are a literary device meant to give consolations to the Christians in Rome who, at that stage, for a small pocket of time, some of them were being sent to the Colosseum to be ripped apart by wild animals. And that somehow in the opening chapter of the Gospel of Mark, there's a way where somebody might go, oh, him too. There's a recognizability of life within life. That's the intelligence of literature, that somehow it gives you these breadcrumbs where you go, me too, what's going to happen? How would I do that? It forms a conversation. And I think that's probably right. I'll default to the expertise of scholars. But I hope there's room for other interpretations too. And I'd like to finish with this, a small collect that I wrote about the company of animals. Because it says, and he was with the wild beasts. And rather than thinking them as the tools of empire, I want to think of them as being employed for their own purposes, uninterested in empire, simply present to questions of hunger and survival. Jesus of the animals, when you'd been led to the end, even at the start, you found friends in unexpected places. Animals with warm hearts and fur, strange tastes and needs and habits. When we are at the end, meet us in the touch of beasts uninterested in grand designs. Because in your own emptiness, you knew what you needed, and you found it in claw and fur and teeth and pointed ears. Amen.